Chosen one. Perhaps some people walked away, not because you were wrong. What if some people left your life, not because they hated you, but because they were never meant to walk the entire journey with you? Not because you failed them, not because you weren't enough to make them stay, but because there was something about your path that only certain people were ever meant to share until the very end. Chosen one. If you're carrying the ache of someone's absence today, a son or daughter who has grown distant, friends who quietly disappeared when life became difficult, or a family member who mocked your faith around the dinner table, then these words are for you. Maybe for you, it was the phone call that went unanswered, even though you knew your child's phone was within reach. Maybe it was the group of friends who once gathered every weekend, but now the only messages that arrive are automated birthday greetings. Or perhaps it was the look in a brother's or sister's eyes whenever you spoke about your faith, a mixture of pity and discomfort, as though what you believed had become something they could no longer understand. I'm not going to tell you they'll come back. I'm not going to promise a reunion someday. But I do want to invite you to consider another possibility, that perhaps something deeper is taking place within that absence than you've been able to see. Stay with me for a little while. Not because you're afraid of missing something, but because this may be the first time someone has invited you to look at your loneliness from an entirely different perspective. The train journey and the stations left behind. Imagine a long train traveling through countless stations over the course of many years. Some passengers board at the very first station, others step on somewhere in the middle of the journey, and some people, despite sitting beside you for years, despite sharing laughter, memories, and countless conversations, eventually step off at a station long before the train reaches its final destination. Many believers return to Job 19:13-14. When they feel abandoned by the very people they trusted most. Job wrote that his relatives had turned away from him, his acquaintances had become strangers, and even his close friends had forgotten him. These are not the words of someone with weak faith. They are the words of one of Scripture's greatest examples of perseverance through suffering. Chosen one. There is something important you need to understand from the very beginning. A train is not broken simply because someone gets off before the journey ends. And you are not broken simply because someone chose to leave at a station where you still had many miles left to travel. Perhaps you've become accustomed to treating every departure as proof that something must be wrong with you. Your child no longer calls, so you conclude you must have failed as a parent. Your friends disappear when life becomes difficult, so you assume you were never worth staying for. A family member mocks your faith, so you begin wondering whether your faith itself is foolish. This is an easy way of thinking to fall into because it offers a false sense of control. If every goodbye is your fault, then you can comfort yourself with the idea that, had you only acted differently, everyone would still be here. But that way of thinking, while it appears to offer control, quietly destroys you from the inside. Day after day, it asks you to carry responsibility for decisions that were never yours to make. Chosen one, over the next few moments, let's carefully untangle that burden together, one piece at a time. But what if those departures were never evidence against you? What if they simply reveal that those people reached the station where their journey ended, while yours still continues? Chosen one, this is not a question you need to answer right now. It is simply a question to carry with you as we continue walking through the rest of this journey together. Chosen one, let me ask you something from the heart. What have the people who walked away actually left behind inside you, besides the pain? You send your child a message. The status changes to seen. 3 days pass, and there is still no reply. You open the group chat with friends who once texted you every single day, only to realize that since you lost your job, the conversation has gone silent for weeks. You sit down at the family dinner table, and a relative casually remarks, with a smile that's half joking and half dismissive, "You still believe in those things?" Many believers turn to Psalm 41:9. When they feel betrayed by someone they trusted most. The verse speaks of a close friend, someone who shared bread at the same table yet turned against him, not an enemy from afar, but someone who once stood very near. I once heard the story of a mother. Every night before going to bed, she would pick up her phone and check whether her son had read the message she had sent. She never sent another text. She simply stared at the word seen, wondering what he might have been thinking as he read her words, and chose not to answer. One evening, she watched the status change from delivered to seen. Almost the moment she put her phone down, her heart raced. She picked it up again, convinced that perhaps this time a reply was coming. She waited 5 minutes, then 10. Then the entire evening slipped away. Nothing changed except that single word. Seen. Still there. Still silent. Chosen one, I will never tell you that kind of silence doesn't hurt. Because it does. And you do not have to pretend otherwise, simply because you're trying to remain faithful. One of the saddest messages people often hear from well-meaning voices is that if you're hurting, you should forgive immediately. Let go immediately. Never feel angry. But the truth is different. You are allowed to feel angry. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to acknowledge that it wounds you when someone you deeply love chooses to walk away. Faith does not require you to pretend that heartbreak isn't heartbreaking. Perhaps your story is different. Not the same details, but the same feeling. A missed phone call that was never returned, an invitation that was never answered, a name still saved in your contacts, even though, deep down, you already know that if you called today, no one would pick up. And there is another kind of pain, one people rarely speak about, though it cuts just as deeply. It happens when someone in your own family, in the middle of a meal surrounded by laughter, makes a casual remark about your faith, something meant as just a joke. The table laughs. You smile politely. You nod. You keep eating. But somewhere inside, something quietly folds inward, becoming just a little smaller than it was moments before. Chosen one, you don't have to count how many stations you've already passed to know how many times you've been hurt. You already know. You've been carrying the weight of those departures for a very long time. Chosen one. There is one question that keeps returning every time you think about the people who walked away. What did I do wrong? You scroll through your contacts and stop at a few familiar names. You wonder whether you should send the first message or wait for them to reach out instead. You type a few words. Then erase them. You type them again, erase them again. Finally, you lock your phone without sending anything at all. Many believers reflect on Proverbs 18:24, which says that there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. But hidden within that verse is another truth that often goes unnoticed. Not every relationship called a friendship is truly that kind of friendship. I once knew a man whose business fell apart. As his life unraveled, he slowly realized that one of his closest friends had quietly disappeared from it. He deleted his messaging app because he couldn't bear seeing that friend's name on his contact list anymore. A few days later, he downloaded it again, just to check whether there might be a message waiting. He repeated this cycle several times in a single week. Delete, download, download, delete. As though his heart still couldn't decide whether to keep hoping or finally let go. He later told me that what hurt most wasn't that his friend never offered financial help. He had never expected that. What broke his heart was something much smaller. Years earlier, that friend had always been the first person he wanted to call whenever something wonderful happened. Now he realized he no longer had the courage to call, even when something painful happened, because he was afraid of hearing nothing but silence on the other end of the line. Chosen one, that is not a sign of weakness. It is the sign of a heart that still knows how to care, even after the mind already knows the answer. Not every empty seat on the train was abandoned because the passenger who once occupied it, or the person sitting beside it, did something wrong. And not every empty seat is your fault. There is something you need to hear very clearly today. Some people leave because of circumstances within their own lives, because of burdens you cannot see, because of limitations they themselves are struggling to carry. Their inability to stay does not determine your worth. Chosen one. There is an important distinction I hope you'll hold on to. Some people leave because they see your season of hardship, and they simply do not have the courage to remain beside you through it. Others leave because their own journey has reached a different destination, a turn in the road that has nothing to do with you. Both kinds of departures leave an empty seat behind. Both create grief. But if you reduce every goodbye to a single question, what did I do wrong? You place on your own shoulders responsibility for choices that were never yours to carry. That doesn't mean you should never examine your own part in relationships that have ended. Healthy self-examination can teach us invaluable lessons. It can help us grow, but there is a line between reflecting in order to become wiser and condemning yourself for the rest of your life. The difference is found in one simple question. Is this question helping you understand yourself more deeply? Or is it only making you feel worse while leading you nowhere at all? Chosen one, this is the hardest part to talk about. And I won't avoid it. Imagine one evening, after a long day, someone standing alone in the kitchen, preparing dinner for one plate, one pair of chopsticks, one chair pulled away from the table, while all the others remain neatly tucked in, untouched. That person sits down. The sound of a knife against the plate echoes through the quiet kitchen, so clearly that they can hear their own breathing. There is no one to tell about the day, no one to ask, "How was your day?" Only silence, the soft clink of silverware, and a meal slowly growing cold. Chosen one, perhaps you know that feeling too. Not the loneliness of a single evening, but the kind of loneliness that has become so familiar that you no longer set an extra place at the table just in case someone might stop by, because somewhere along the way you learned that no one would. There is a difference between spending one evening alone and gradually shrinking your entire life until it fits inside that loneliness. The first lonely evening is simply an event, but when it happens again and again and again, it can quietly become a way of living. You stop inviting people over. You stop making plans. You even stop hoping someone might knock on the door, Not because that's what you truly want, but because that is how a heart that has been wounded too many times learns to protect itself. Many believers turn to Psalm 142:4. On evenings exactly like these, the psalmist says, "No one cares for my soul, there is no refuge for me." Those are not the words of someone with weak faith. They are the words of someone being completely honest about the depth of their loneliness. Chosen one, I will not rush to explain what this loneliness means. I will not promise that it will disappear soon. Some evenings, the only thing you can do is sit quietly with the emptiness, without pretending it doesn't hurt. Someone once shared with me the story of the first evening she realized there was no one left to call and tell about her day. It wasn't because there were no phone numbers saved in her contacts. There were plenty. But as she scrolled through each name, she realized that one by one, those people had slowly drifted away, especially after she began holding on to beliefs they no longer understood. She told me that the deepest pain wasn't that no one called her back. The deepest pain was learning to live with one haunting question. Why were the people who had once been closest to me the first ones to leave? She went on to say that for a season she tried calling each friend from her old circle, one after another. Not to argue, not to accuse, simply to hear a familiar voice. But every conversation seemed shorter than the one before, more awkward, as though both people were quietly searching for an excuse to end the call. After several attempts, she stopped calling, not because she had become bitter, but because she realized that trying to hold on was hurting her more than accepting their absence. Chosen one, perhaps what you need right now isn't an explanation for why they left. Perhaps what you need is permission to sit with their absence without pretending it doesn't hurt, even if only for tonight. Chosen one, let me ask you another question. Was everyone ever meant to travel the entire journey with you? In 2 Timothy 4:16-17. Paul writes about the first time he stood on trial. He says that no one stood beside him. Everyone had deserted him. Think about who is saying those words. This was one of the most devoted proclaimers of the gospel, a man who had traveled far and wide, encouraging others to remain steadfast in their faith. Yet at the very moment he needed companionship the most, the people he had trusted were nowhere to be found. But Paul doesn't stop there. He continues by saying that the Lord stood with him and strengthened him, enabling him to carry on. Chosen one, look carefully at what this means. Paul never says that being abandoned didn't hurt. He never pretends it was unimportant. He simply tells us something more. The absence of those people was not the whole story. Think about that for a moment. Here was a man who had written letters encouraging churches across the world. He had strengthened the faith of thousands. Yet when he needed a friend standing beside him, not a single person appeared. If even Paul experienced that kind of loneliness, then your own feelings of abandonment are not evidence that something is wrong with your faith. They are evidence that you are living a real life, with real relationships, and real relationships are not always as permanent as we hope they will be. Now think again about the image of the train. No passenger boards a train with a ticket guaranteed to last until the final destination. Some board at the very first station, only to step off not long afterward. Others climb aboard halfway through the journey, yet remain beside you until the very end. And some, despite sharing the same carriage for many miles and becoming deeply woven into your life, still arrive at a station that belongs to them, a station that was never yours. That is not the train's fault, and it is not yours either. Perhaps some people in your life were simply never given tickets for the entire journey. That doesn't diminish the value of what they gave you during the miles they did share with you. Chosen one, let me be especially clear here, because this is where many people misunderstand. Accepting that someone was only meant to walk part of your journey does not minimize what they meant to you. In fact, it allows you to appreciate what was real without demanding that it last forever in order to have mattered. Think about it another way. A relationship that lasts 5 years before ending is not automatically a failed relationship simply because it wasn't lifelong. Those 5 years may still have been deeply meaningful, deeply valuable. Measuring the worth of a relationship solely by its length is like measuring the worth of a book only by the number of its pages, while ignoring everything written inside them. Chosen one. If these words bring a particular person to mind, someone whose name still appears in your message thread, someone you've continued reaching out to, only to receive silence, I'd like to invite you to try one small thing tonight. Look at that conversation, the one you've been trying so hard to keep alive, even though only silence comes back. And for just one night, allow yourself to stop trying, not to end the relationship forever, not to declare that it is beyond hope, simply to stop reopening the wound one more time, for one evening. This isn't about disappearing so they'll miss you. That's a strategy. And strategy is not what I'm inviting you into. What I'm inviting you to do is much simpler, just for tonight. Allow yourself to step away from the train door where you've been standing, waiting for someone to come back aboard. Instead, turn around, walk back into the carriage, and quietly take your own seat. Chosen one, this is where everything begins to turn. Psalm 27:10 is a passage many believers return to when they feel abandoned by those closest to them, even by their own family. It says that even if a father or mother were to forsake them, there remains someone greater than anything human beings can give or take away, who will never leave. Chosen one, let those words settle into your heart for a moment. This is not a vague attempt at comfort. It is a direct acknowledgement that even the relationship we often believe to be the strongest in life, the bond between parent and child, can be broken. Scripture does not avoid that painful reality, but immediately after recognizing it, it reminds us of something equally important. Not everything collapses when one relationship does. Picture that train platform just after several passengers have stepped off. Someone is sweeping the floor. Someone is carefully straightening the benches. They are not doing it because no one will ever come again. They are doing it precisely because another train will eventually arrive, and new passengers will one day step onto that platform. Have you ever considered that possibility? What if the emptiness you feel is not the end of your story, but a season of preparation? Their departure was not necessarily a rejection of you. Their silence was not a verdict on your worth. Their decision to leave the train did not mean your journey had gone off the rails. Perhaps some people left your life not because you were unworthy, but because the platform was quietly being prepared for something you cannot yet see. Chosen one, hear this carefully. An empty seat does not mean the train car will remain empty forever. It simply means that seat is waiting for the right person at the right time, in a way none of us can force or predict. Let me make something very clear here, because this is often misunderstood. I am not saying that everyone who left will automatically be replaced by someone better, nor am I suggesting that your present pain will soon be compensated by a new relationship. What I am saying is much simpler. The emptiness you feel today does not have to become a life sentence simply because it is real. The platform may remain quiet for a long time, perhaps a very long time, but there is a profound difference between an empty platform and an abandoned one. An empty platform is still swept clean, it is still cared for, someone still believes another train will eventually arrive. An abandoned platform is left to decay because no one expects anything to stop there ever again. So the real question is not whether your platform is empty. The real question is whether you are caring for your heart like a place that is still open to what may come, or whether you have already declared it abandoned. Caring for an empty platform does not mean sitting there every day, anxiously waiting for someone to appear. It means keeping your heart open. It means believing that healthy, meaningful relationships are still possible, even if you do not know when they will come or who they will be. That is not a task to accomplish. It is a posture of hope. Chosen one, what does it actually look like to live with an empty platform in the middle of an ordinary day? It does not mean rushing to fill every empty seat with whoever happens to come along, simply to escape the feeling of loneliness. It means learning how to stand on that platform alone without panicking. That is a skill, not a punishment. Very few people are ever taught how to be alone without believing they are somehow being punished. We are taught how to make friends, how to preserve relationships, but we are rarely taught how to remain steady when those relationships are no longer there. Chosen one, think about the difference between two people standing on the very same empty platform. The first stands with their eyes fixed on the tracks, waiting for a train that departed long ago, unable to see anything except its absence. The second stands on that same platform, carrying the very same loss. Yet instead of staring only down the tracks, they begin to notice the sunlight filtering through the station roof, the birds resting on the overhead wires, the small cafe tucked into the corner of the station that they had somehow never noticed before. Both people are standing in the same place. Both carry the same grief, but one is living inside the absence. The other is slowly learning how to live while the absence is still there. Chosen one, I want to leave you with a question. You do not have to answer it today. What if the next train never comes? What if the person who walked away never returns? What if that circle of friends never reaches out again? What if that family member never stops mocking your faith? Could you still discover a way to live a full and meaningful life on this very platform? I am not asking that question to discourage you. I ask because the answer to it is where genuine strength begins. If your peace depends entirely on someone else's return, then you have placed your peace into the hands of someone who has already shown they are free to leave. But if you can discover even a measure of peace while the platform remains empty, then that peace belongs to you, regardless of what happens next. Chosen one, you do not need to know who will board the train at the next station. You do not need a list of new names to replace the names you have lost. You simply need to know that you no longer have to stand at the train door, waiting for those who have already stepped off to come back. That does not mean closing your heart to everyone else. It means no longer spending all your strength looking behind you toward stations that have already disappeared into the distance, while your own journey continues forward. Perhaps that quiet shift of your gaze from behind you to what lies ahead is what the next door has really been about all along. Not one specific opportunity leading to one specific outcome at one specific time, but your own capacity to remain open to life, even after your heart has been wounded. Chosen one, let me slow down with you for a moment before we bring this conversation to a close. Picture the passenger sitting inside that train. For a long time, they have been looking through the rear window, watching one station after another disappear into the darkness. Now, they slowly turn their head and look forward. Not because the pain is gone, not because they have forgotten the people who once shared the journey, but because they realize that if they spend their whole life looking backward, they may never notice what is unfolding ahead, even if they cannot yet see it clearly. The train is still moving. The windows are still there. And beyond the darkness, there is still a direction they can choose to face. There is a very small moment that perhaps only the traveler notices. The moment when, for the first time in a very long while, their eyes leave the rear window and settle on the one in front. No bell rings to announce it. No one applauds. It simply happens, quietly, like a leaf drifting to the ground without making a sound. Chosen one, you do not need to know the name of the next station. You only need to give yourself permission to turn your head, even just a little, and look forward instead of remaining fixed on the stations that have already passed. That is not forgetting. It is a slow, intentional choice to keep living, even while carrying the pain of those earlier stations. You can carry that pain with you and still face forward at the same time. Those two realities do not cancel each other out. You do not have to choose between grieving what was lost and continuing to live. You can do both, slowly, gently, one step at a time, at your own pace. No one has the right to force you to move faster than that pace. Not anyone else, not even yourself. Final thoughts to carry with you. Chosen one, before we part today, let me leave you with 3 things to remember. First, the people who have walked out of your life may never return in the way you hope, and no one has the right to promise you otherwise. Second, the way you understand their absence may already be changing, from seeing it as proof that something is wrong with you to recognizing it as one chapter in a much longer journey that you are still living. Third, you can stand firm today, not because every empty seat has been filled, but because you no longer have to stand at the train door, waiting for those who have already stepped off. Chosen one, I know that after this video ends, that platform may still be quiet. Your son or daughter may still not reply to your message. Your old circle of friends may remain silent. That family member may still make another dismissive remark the next time you gather around the table. I cannot promise that any of those things will change tomorrow, next week, or by any specific date. No one has the authority to make that promise on your behalf. But I can tell you one thing with confidence. Every time you choose not to stand at that train door waiting, every time you choose to face forward instead of looking back, you are living, not merely waiting. And that by itself is something real, however small it may seem. Perhaps years from now, when you look back on this season, you will not remember the exact day your child finally called. You may not remember the day a new friend entered your life, but you may remember this moment, the moment you decided that even while the platform remained empty, you would still choose to live, to care, and to believe that your story was not over simply because a few seats had become vacant. If these words have spoken to the absence you are carrying today, consider sharing them with someone else who may also be sitting alone tonight at a quiet kitchen table with a single plate, a single pair of chopsticks, and nothing but silence for company. Not because you lose anything by keeping them to yourself, but because sometimes the greatest gift a person can receive is simply the reassurance that someone else has stood on the same platform. And if you would like, leave a comment below with the name of the platform where you find yourself today. You do not have to explain who it represents. It does not have to be eloquent. It only needs to be honest. Chosen one, I cannot promise that the person who walked away will ever return. No one can make that promise for you, but you do not have to spend the rest of your life standing on that platform, waiting for a train that departed long ago. May you set your phone down tonight without feeling the need to check whether someone has finally replied. And may you discover that even in the quiet, there can be a peace that gently reminds you, you are not alone.